Welcome to Cloud AI. Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State is a classic work of political philosophy. It provides a systematic analysis of the nature and role of the state, examining its origins, functions, and impact on society. The book is widely regarded as one of the most influential works in the libertarian tradition, and it continues to be studied and debated by scholars and activists around the world. Anatomy of the State was first published in 1974, as part of a collection of essays titled, Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature and Other Essays. Rothbard was already a prominent figure in the libertarian movement, having authored several books and numerous articles on economics and political theory. In Anatomy of the State, he sought to provide a concise and accessible analysis of the state, drawing on insights from economics, history, and philosophy. Rothbard's thinking was heavily influenced by the Austrian School of economics, particularly the work of Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. Like these thinkers, Rothbard emphasized the importance of individual liberty and the spontaneous order of the market. He also drew on the insights of classical liberal philosophers such as John Locke, Adam Smith, and Herbert Spencer. However, Rothbard was also critical of some aspects of the classical liberal tradition, particularly its endorsement of a limited state. He argued that even a minimal state would inevitably grow in power and scope, leading to the violations of individual rights and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the ruling elite. Instead, he advocated for a radical libertarianism that rejected the state altogether, in favor of voluntary associations and decentralized decision-making. The core argument of Anatomy of the State is that the state is fundamentally a predatory institution, existing to extract resources from society and to maintain the power and privilege of the ruling class. Rothbard defines the state as that institution which possesses a monopoly of force and the right to tax, and he argues that this monopoly creates perverse incentives for those who control it. Rothbard identifies three basic functions of the state: war, protection of property, and arbitration. However, he argues that these functions are deeply problematic, and that they inevitably lead to the expansion of state power and the erosion of individual rights. Rothbard argues that war is the most destructive and deadly function of the state, leading to the slaughter of millions of people and the destruction of entire civilizations. He identifies two basic types of war: imperialist war, which is waged to conquer and subjugate other nations, and defensive war, which is waged to repel invaders. However, Rothbard argues that even defensive wars are problematic, as they inevitably lead to the growth of the state and the violation of individual rights. He notes that the state has a vested interest in perpetuating wars, as they provide a pretext for expanding its power and increasing its revenue through taxation and debt. Rothbard argues that the state's function of protecting property is similarly flawed, as it leads to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the ruling elite. He notes that the state's protection of property is always selective, favoring the interests of the wealthy and powerful over those of the poor and marginalized. Furthermore, Rothbard argues that the state's protection of property is inherently coercive, as it relies on the use of force to enforce property rights. He notes that property rights are not natural or objective, but rather are defined and enforced by the state itself. This creates a situation in which the state is able to define property rights in ways that benefit the ruling elite, while excluding and oppressing other groups. Rothbard argues that the state's function of arbitration is similarly flawed, as it is inherently biased in favor of the ruling elite. He notes that the state's courts and legal system are heavily influenced by political and economic interests, and that they are often used to protect the interests of the powerful at the expense of the powerless. Furthermore, Rothbard argues that the state's legal system is often used to create and enforce unjust laws, such as those that criminalize victimless crimes or restrict individual freedom. He notes that the state's legal system is often used as a tool of social control, designed to maintain the power and privilege of the ruling elite. Rothbard also argues that the state's monopoly on arbitration creates a situation in which there is no competition or innovation in the legal system. He notes that in a free market system, individuals and organizations would be able to choose their own dispute resolution mechanisms, and that this competition would lead to greater efficiency, fairness, and innovation in the legal system. Rothbard's analysis of the state has important implications for political theory and practice. He argues that the state is inherently corrupt and predatory, and that it is therefore necessary to eliminate it altogether. He advocates for a radical libertarianism that rejects the state and relies instead on voluntary associations and decentralized decision-making. This approach has been influential in the libertarian movement, which has sought to promote greater individual freedom and autonomy by reducing the power and scope of the state. However, Rothbard's approach has also been controversial, as many critics argue that it is unrealistic and idealistic, and that it ignores the practical realities of politics and governance. Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State is a classic work of political philosophy that provides a critical analysis of the nature and role of the state. Anatomy of the State remains a widely read and studied work of political theory, and it continues to inspire debate and discussion about the nature of political power and authority. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel.